Hello, everybody. In case you're wondering if you're at the right place, this is Romances for Everyone. We're coming from the Montclair Public Library, the Bellevue Avenue branch, distinguished Bellevue Avenue branch. We'll just give you a few more minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you. I'll maybe start my thank yous at this point. Janet Torsney, I'm the director of the Montclair Public Library. I'm so glad everyone is here with us today. We are here to talk about romance and romance being for everyone. So I want to thank some of our partners for Source Books, both Timothy and Roan are authors with them. It's a great publishing company. I want to read their statement because I know you'll agree with me. It's something we want to be part of. We are an independent women-led publisher bound together by the idea that books change lives. Come on now, we all want to be part of that, right? And our other partner on this is the Watchung bookseller. They are in Montclair. They are our local, friendly, independent bookseller, and we love working with them. And we just put in the chat, the books will all be available through the Watchung bookseller, so please buy them through that link. And if you're elsewhere, also support your own local independent bookseller because we all need them. Our other partner today is Out Montclair. They're a somewhat new organization here in Montclair. They had our first Pride Day last year. It was very exciting. And Peter Jacobellis may be joining us. He is the executive director of Out Montclair as well as a council member. And as his just an incredible biography, but I'll just tell you that he is the executive director now of Out Montclair, and he is council member at large in Montclair, New Jersey, and he is a great council member and an even better communicator. He's just really an outstanding person. So as I said, it's the first time we've done anything together. They do lots of fun events. They keep the fun in fundraising and education. So we're really excited to have brought this important genre to their attention. So I hope you all enjoy it. We are going to be led by Kristen Como, who put everything together for us. She is the manager of the Bellevue Avenue branch of the Montclair Public Library. She's an outstanding person. That's all you really need to know. She's an outstanding person. She does a wonderful job. She loves romance. And we, Kristen and I think all librarians really enjoy this genre because of the passion that romance readers bring. Did you see what I did there? Passion, romance. But it's such a, it's a genre that people enjoy reading so very much. So it's something that we really appreciate being able to bring the books to people. And as we're going to discuss today, the inclusion and diversity and relationship with your audience is fantastic. So with that, I'm going to step aside and turn it over to Kristen.
Hello, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here, and I'm going to introduce our moderator, Hannah Walker. Hannah Walker is a writer, columnist, and professional theater arts marketer based in Asbury Park. When she isn't indulging her parasocial relationship with William Shakespeare, aren't we all? She is unironically watching the Hallmark Channel and enjoying year-round beach reads. I agree. So I'm going to turn it over to Hannah so that she can introduce our wonderful authors. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Beach read is a state of mind. You can do it anywhere, anytime. So it's my absolute honor and pleasure to be here tonight with these two incredible authors. Their bios are as full of joy and accomplishment and brilliance as they are themselves. Timothy Janovsky is a queer, multidisciplinary storyteller from New Jersey. He holds a bachelor's degree from Muhlenberg College and a self-appointed certificate in rom-com studies, accreditation pending. Any day now, I'm sure it'll come in. When he's not daydreaming about young Hugh Grant, he's telling jokes, playing characters, and writing books. He's the author of Never Been Kissed and You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, and his queer time travel rom-com New Adult comes out August 15th. And you can see the beautiful display of these incredibly lovely works right behind him. Our next guest is Roan Parrish, who is gradually attempting to write love stories in every genre, truly a mighty crusade, and we salute it. When not writing, she could usually be found cutting her friend's hair, meandering through whatever city she's in while listening to torch songs and melodic death metal, or cooking overly elaborate meals. She loves bonfires, winter beaches, minor chord harmonies, and self-tattooing. One time she may or may not have baked a 6-layer chocolate cake and then thrown it out of the window in a fit of pique, a mood that I think probably all of us can relate. She's the author of a staggering number of books. I think we're over 18 or 19 at this point, including audiobooks, Audible originals, has been translated into multiple languages, and her latest works include the 2 releases last year, The Holiday Trap and The Rivals of Casper Road, both joyously queer takes on holiday romances and all of the joy there, Christmas and Halloween respectively. So welcome to you both. It is so fun to be talking to both of you. And I think we'll just, while we're chatting, for all of our attendees, if you have questions for Roan or Timothy, pop them in the Q&A. I have some questions that were asked as part of the registration, so I'll be peppering those in throughout, but we will have a Q&A period at the end. So if something occurs to you, pop it in there, and then we'll hopefully have time to, I mean, I feel like this is an hour. We're going to keep to that, respect everybody's time, but I mean, I know I would love to talk to you guys for like 6 hours, but that might, you know, get a little late. People would get hungry. We won't push it. But kick it off. The title of this event, why we're all here today, is Romances for Everyone. Can you, both of you, talk a little bit, kind of what does that statement mean to you? What is that as artists, as readers, as authors? What is that? Oh, I think Roan, you're on mute. Roan, I think you're on mute. I'm sorry. It had to happen. It had to happen at one point today.
I mean, of course, it'll happen literally 3 more times.
Right.
Yeah, I love a big word like everyone, because while usually I hate a generalization, I feel like to say romance is for everyone, the everyone there is a challenge. And what that means is romance is not representing everyone until it's representing everyone. And there are a lot of people out there, a lot of people. And I think that this is a push that if the word is taken literally, which maybe we should, that means we desperately need to include the people you might think least likely to end up in a romance plot, the people that we have seen the least of in romance so far. Because this is a genre about love and human connection. Those are things that most people have experience of or desire for. And by truly challenging ourselves to ask what would it mean to include everyone, I think we can only grow.
I love that. I love what Roan just said about it being a challenge, because I do think that every day authors sit down and challenge themselves to think outside of what is expected in a narrative, in a story. And I mean, for me specifically as a queer person, I experience love and human connection in a way that is unique to the way that I grew up and the way that I see the world and the way that I walk down the street. And so those are things that when we say everyone, romance includes everyone, it's that like everybody deserves the feeling of being accepted and validated. And I think that's what a romance novel's gift to their characters is the ability to like crack open a shell, right? They usually have like a misconception or a theory about the world that gets challenged over the course of the book. And so not only are we challenging the characters to believe in happily ever after and beyond, but we're challenging the reader to believe in that for both themselves and for the world at large.
Yeah, that's lovely. I like it as not just a celebration, but also a call to action. I think that's very powerful, very beautiful. So how did you fall in love with writing romance? And what about the genre kind of keeps you coming back to it as an author? I can't stop you this early. Come on. Hardballs, throwing hardballs.
Oh, I think for me, the thing about romance is that what I really enjoy is the idea that we, again, it has to do with that misconception about the world. A lot of times when I sit down to write a romance novel, I'm like thinking about one idea that as I've grown older has been challenged either in myself, in someone I know, someone else has brought it to my attention and has challenged that. And I love being able to like break apart those stigmas and wrong held beliefs and things like that over things like as silly, not silly, they're actually really beautiful, as like sharing popcorn at a drive-in movie theater with the guy that you like, right? Like that seems like it's on the surface a very light, very whimsical, very magical moment, but there is so much to unpack in those dates and long drives and rambling conversations. I think romance is the one genre where you can, no cliche is ever beating a dead horse, right? Because we're always pulling something new. Like we come to tropes so that we can deconstruct them and learn more about the world that we live in. And so I think that's one of the things that I like about romance is that on the surface, it feels a little bit like light, fun, good time. And then you get into it and you're like, wait, this is also about trauma and familial relationships and how hard it is to be a human being in the world. Like, you know, I think lit fic on the surface, we know that going in when we crack open a lit fic book, like we're going to get that. But in a romance, like it comes in a package that is so caring. And that to me is comforting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I didn't grow up reading romance, but I grew up loving the romantic storylines in the other genres books that I read. I don't know why, it just wasn't on my radar as a younger reader. And then I started writing it or I started reading it and writing it kind of by accident, which is another story. But I think the thing that I love so much about romance as a dynamic between two characters is that it really can take on any problem. Like there's a romance for almost every problem out there, you know? And the more people are writing it, the more problems will be represented. And so like if you think that you are just like an unlovable, hopeless monster, write down the 3 keywords why you think you are an unlovable, hopeless monster. Go to Twitter and be like, I'm an unlovable, hopeless monster for these 3 reasons. Give me book recommendations where one of the characters is an unlovable monster for these 3 reasons, because I need to read it to see them get a happily ever after, to understand that I am not hopeless, I'm not unlovable, and I'm not a monster. I'm just someone who hasn't gotten there yet. Like I'm not done baking, I'm still living my life. And yeah, and I feel like I have read romance novels. I will of course forget all titles and authors if asked, but where I read someone who I was like, oh my God, this person is just like me. Uh-oh. And then it would like get to the part where they had their fatal misconception challenged, or their like central misconception challenged, and I was like, no, I don't think that's gonna fix it, guys. And then like of course it does, and everyone's happy. And at the end of that, like what I would be forced to think about is like, why are you so resistant to the fact that this is possible? Is it maybe because then you would have to do work or challenge yourself? Obviously, yes. But I feel like romance novels, it's like microdosing therapy, like microdosing relationship therapy. And I love that.
It's so true. Some of my favorite romances is like the romantic relationship is part of the story, obviously, but it's also like that's not what is going to fix all of the protagonist's problems. And I think that there's often like the romance is part of a bigger story. Like if The Holiday Trap, one of the protagonists is dealing with really serious like family boundary issues and like codependency and working through that. And You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, that's just some of my like the way that character works through his anxiety and working out life plans and kind of how he's been raised. So I think in both of these books, which I love so much, really like some of the high points of my December reading, which I consume December content like a truly lunatic person, but that it was like the characters find love and be inspired by that, but it's also like that is part of their journey to bettering themselves and being the best version that they can be, and then they happen to find the love of their lives along the way as like a just the treat on top.
Mhm.
So I wonder, just speaking of your body of works, both of you, this is an attendee question. Which of your books is your personal favorite and why? Either in the text itself or the process of writing it, what's kind of come about after it? Favoritism. I mean, if you want to hide the book so they don't hear which one is your parents' favorite, I don't understand exactly. Don't listen.
Oh, that's so hard, and I'm really, really bad at favorites. It changes, like my favorites of everything change depending on context. But I wrote a book called Invitation to the Blues, which is about a character, Jude, who has struggled with lifelong, pretty debilitating depression, drug-resistant depression, I should say. And I wrote that book, and I didn't know how badly I needed to write that book until I found myself telling my own story and talking about like things that I myself have struggled with, like depression, in ways that they have sort of affected my ability to believe that I am, worthy of love, worthy of attention, all those things. And I feel like writing that book was one of the most important parts of my getting past that, I think. So I don't know if I can say favorite, but I definitely, like, in writing Jude, learned to be much kinder to myself. And so it kind of, I have to always like give it its due.
That's beautiful. That's really lovely.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I think too, there's like always recency bias in what you're writing because it's kind of reflecting a little bit of what you're going through and experiencing that moment. But what Roan just said kind of made me think a little bit about writing Your Mean One, Matthew Prince, and how, I started out writing that book in the pandemic, right when I lost my job, right when everything closed, right when I needed the comfort most. And I was like, and I only started writing it with the idea of being like, oh my gosh, I had this deep obsession with ABC Family Christmas movies as a teenager, but they never had any queer people in them. I just want to write one where it feels like I'm on the page and I get all the ooey gooey stuff. And then like maybe 40 pages into the draft, it's like he has an anxiety attack. And it's like, oh, like, wait, what? But I'm just, telling the story, moving forward, doing whatever. And as I was kind of working through it with my editor and building more on the character of Matthew as a whole, his generalized anxiety disorder like kind of blared out at me. And at the time, I had an undiagnosed generalized anxiety disorder, was not really talking to anyone about this, was not seeking the help that I probably needed. And at the end of Your Mean One, Matthew Prince, I wrote this scene where Matthew goes back to therapy for the first time in quite a long time, that he's been ignoring his mental health to the point of drastically buying an island. And then at the end of the book goes back to therapy and is like, oh, like this hard work, it's lifelong work. It wasn't just like I did it once and now it's done, like I'm going to be fine. Like the book inspired me to go and get help and talk to someone. And like that is a gift that I both gave Matthew on the page and then gave myself in real life. And so I will always be kind of indebted to that book for reflecting back to me some subconscious part of me that was asking for help that I wasn't really listening to. So yeah.
It's beautiful. You're not just telling the story, you're like an active participant with the story, and it's affecting you as much as it affects your readers, which is really kind of like a beautiful ongoing relationship. Yeah. Well, I think it's something that's been certainly on my mind a lot lately, just because of society has come so far, and I think representation has come so far. But then there's also a lot of real darkness in our country, in our world right now. I think especially this month, it's been very hard to just keep going with all of these terrible things happening in the news. All-time high rise in anti-trans legislation across the country, hate crimes, and attempts to suppress the beautiful queer community. And in the face of that, I think there's something, or at least I feel there's something very radical about queer romance and queer joy and how powerful it is to celebrate that. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that, about kind of choosing joyful stories during times and things that can feel very dark.
Yeah. Timothy, do you want to go first? No. Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry. Whoosh, threw that in there.
No, it's such a good question, and I think that there are people who can kind of separate their personal life from the news, and I'm not one of those people, both because it is about me and concerns me, and because many of my loved ones are going through extreme grief and fear because of having their lives threatened by legislation. And I think for me, the thing about queer joy, trans joy, is that there have been a lot of attempts to get rid of us, right? How much larger and how much stronger would the queer and trans community be without AIDS, the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, right? There would be a lot more of us. And I think for me, queer joy, trans joy, is about saying we're still here and we are whole people. We're not just our queerness, we're not just our transness, we're not just our trauma. We are people with families and loved ones, hopes. And I think reading a story from the point of view of or about people who you don't see as fully human, or who can sometimes be framed in the media as not fully human, it is a letter. Those books are a letter to anyone who pick them up that say, this is who we are. We care most about loving each other and loving the world. And I think no one can deny that when you read a romance novel like that, because you see how much love can save a person, save a life, save a reputation. Yeah, and I think that the thing that comforts me the most when things are really hard like they are right now is like, I wrote some letters and I sent them out there, and I hope I can write some more letters, and I hope that we will all be there, to get them.
I'm glad you mentioned self-tattooing in your bio. I'm going to get that all tattooed on my body. So we can talk later about scheduling that. Thanks.
Totally. That's good.
Timothy, would you anything to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Roan just said about it, a book being a letter, I think is really beautiful, because I think choosing joy is hard. Choosing joy is never the easy option, right? And so calling it a letter is a way to say something like, I think there's a misconception in the world that when a queer person writes a novel, or trans person writes a novel, or a person of color writes a novel, it's to educate someone. It's to tell them, like, whatever. That is completely false, right? Like, that is a false assumption you are making as a reader coming into a story, telling me that change my worldview, teach me how to walk a mile in your shoes. That's just completely not what it is. And what I find most beautiful about queer romance specifically is that these books are not there to teach a lesson. These books are not there to serve as a roadmap. These books are not there to tell you that queer people live one way and this is the one way they love and this is how they do things. These are stories about individual queer characters who are experiencing love in a timeline and a rate and in a moment that is right for them and authentic to their experience. And one of the things, and I don't know if Roan shares this, but I feel lucky every time I sit down to write a queer romance, in that I get to sit in the sidecar of someone else's love story. And there is, like you said, something very radical about choosing vulnerability, choosing peace, choosing connection, because romance novels very rarely, especially queer ones, are love stories between two people, right? They could be poly romances, they could be about found family, they could be about community, they could be about small town love. And I think I always think about every moment of joy for a character is a gift And like Roan says, like a letter, I'm sending it out of the world. I'm tying it up with a bow and I'm sending it out into the world. And I've lost the train of my thought, but that was the gist of it. And that's that.
It was a beautiful trip. We were happy to ride that with you. It was wonderful. Thank you both for your insights and your grace in that. I think it's really beautiful and inspiring for readers and lovers of the genre as well. So in a little bit of a turn, we can talk, Timothy, you talked about this earlier, romance and tropes. It's just like the beautiful, I feel like being like a match made in heaven is like such a corny, but I'm going for it. We're going, it's a match made in heaven, romance and tropes. I think the queering of tropes really adds like another fun element to the joy of reading LGBT romances and everything. Can you talk about like, how does that fit into your process? Sort of what comes first? Is it, you know, I know, Tim, you talked about being inspired by like how ABC Christmases. Do the tropes come first? Do the characters come first? What makes a trope particularly like ripe to be like, ooh, I'm gonna queer this up like nobody's business? How does that work into your process? Or is it not a conscious part of it at all? I was like 7 questions in one. I'm sorry. I'm excited about tropes.
I definitely don't think about it consciously going in, although it has been pointed out to me that that is a terrible business decision and that I should. So I'm gonna try to going forward. I guess it comes naturally kind of like because I have ingested so many romance stories, whether it's like books, romance novels, rom-coms, hearing stories of friends' romances, that I think the tropes just kind of like they're I just know them, they're just there, but I don't really have like favorite tropes or ones that I will never do. I think that they're all so fun, and what's most fun to me about kind of being like, oh, I'm gonna pick a trope to sort of like punch this up a little bit. You know, sometimes you write a book and it's like it's just missing that little sparkle. You know, it just needs like a little sparkle, and a trope then is a great way to be like, well, what if I added this little thing? And it's like just the little squeeze of lemon that you need. And I think that that is a really fun way to be like, okay, something's not quite sparking. Given what I have, like what would be the trope that would be the most natural fit here, or the weirdest fit here, or the funniest, depending on what kind of book you're writing, the hottest, whatever. And I love then being like, oh yeah, that's the one. It definitely need to add like a little only one bed there, or a sprinkle of snowed in there, or whatever. And then even though I'm not such a trope person, randomly I've been obsessed with this show Married at First Sight, which is a reality TV show where couples get matched and married at first sight. It's very strange. I blame my sister, but I'm obsessed with it. It's so weird. It's like watching a social experiment. And so last night, as I got ready to hang out with a friend, I accidentally plotted a whole book in like the time it took me to walk from the TV to the fire outside. And it's just like all tropes. And I'm like, where did this come from? This is not what I usually do, but I think it's because I had just been watching reality TV, and they like play so heavily into the like romance tropes as a way of structuring the show. So I think they just like, it's osmosis for me.
It was all that bottled up, not being conscious of tropes, just got focused into one idea.
That's right. Exactly.
Timothy, talk us through your trope relationship.
Yeah, so a friend of mine tagged me on TikTok recently in a trope off bracket, like, you know, those little TikTok things where you like waggle your head and it puts it in a little thing. And I was doing that, and I actually like, this is just between us and the 27 people in the room, that I did it a couple times actually, because I felt like I wasn't giving some tropes enough due. And I felt like there were times where I was like, okay, but this book that I really love has this trope in it. I think similarly, as a consumer of media my whole life, always watching movies, always reading books, always whatever, I absorbed the tropes. Like, right, I know intellectually, I didn't know they had names. I didn't know people did them in real life, like whatever. I just was kind of like, oh, okay, like these are natural born things in a story. So I knew in the ABC Family rom-com, like, okay, person's gonna go to small town's going to change person, right? So like when I started writing Matthew Prince, there was like no point in my head where I was calling this like a fish out of water romance. I wasn't calling it a small town romance. I wasn't calling it an enemies to lovers romance. I was just basically writing the story as I kind of knew that the hill of the story structure would go. And then when I was teasing things out, I'm like, oh, okay, they share a room and they share a bunk bed. Oh my God, that's only one bunk bed, right? Like now I've decided that it's only one bunk bed. And that's great for me to go out into the world and say like, oh my God, you know that trope you love, only one bed? Well, this book has only one bunk bed. Like, isn't that fun, right? Because it's just a little tidbit that you can share with someone. It's almost like the samples at Costco, right? Like a trope is the sample at Costco, right? Like it's the thing that gets you to buy the product, and then you get to go home and have a whole experience with the product. But I think one of the fun things too is that like I've noticed, especially with my friends and in the world, that like queer folk don't tend to have like the linear romances or the exact beats that like a straight romance does. And so like a lot of times when I go to like write a trope, I'm like, I don't know that that's gonna feel authentic to me or to the character. So I wrote a second chance friends to lovers romance. I wrote an enemies to lovers romance. But when I was writing new adult, which I do kind of start with like pieces of media that I really, really love that I think would be perfect to have a queer perspective put upon them. So new adult is a spin on 13 going on 30. And I always write from the first person POV, which first of all, when you watch 13 going on 30, you're like, wow, so fun. She was 13, now she's 30, so goofy. In real life, that's an existential nightmare. Like he has woken up 7 years in the future and he has no idea what's going on. Terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. And I'm emailing my editor like, this might be a little darker than we anticipated. And like this book ended up being, so it's like we have friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, then we have friends to lovers to enemies to friends to lovers to friends to lovers. Like, because we're jumping time, we're jumping the moment, we're jumping identity, right? Like we're jumping all these things. And so, yeah, I think the most fun part is sitting down, starting with story and character, and then finding those really juicy tropes that you can like start to like play up and heighten in the story so that your readers can have fun with them. Because I think sometimes when I open a book and I like start reading and I'm like, oh, they're checking into a hotel, there's not going to be enough beds. There's just not going to be enough beds. And you feel so smart in that moment. And then it's just so satisfying when they have to cuddle, you know?
The payoff is so good. You know it's coming. The concept of 13 going on 30 as a gothic horror is one that's going to stay with me. And I really appreciate that.
I mean, the book comes out in August and you could read, like, I personally was like, this is a nightmare. Like, I don't know how he's going to get out of this, but like, personally, I feel like I'm in hell.
Very good point. So this is one of the attendee questions will pop in, a little bit related, branching off of this. What is your most unusual or atypical source of inspiration? Something maybe not derived from straight, the wonders of reality TV or realities of beautiful in-person romances. Any cereal boxes sparking romantic ideas?
That's the thing, is I feel like it can be kind of anything, because it's not really, this is when people ask this, where do you get your ideas? I think that sometimes they really want, like, I was looking at a cereal box and I saw the word elf, and then that reminded me of this other, but that's just like any of those pieces are swappable, inable, or outable. So like whenever I'm working on a project, it sort of lives in my head even when I'm not working on it. And so then if I'm like walking down the street and I see someone who has, like, the thing is, it's not about the thing, it's about my response to the thing. So anyone walking down the street who has a thing, like whatever the thing may be, and it might remind me of like my grandfather, something else, but eventually it will be the thing that catalyzes some little character trait, some piece of a scene. Like if I'm just sitting down and I know that someone's going to go out on a date at a place, I probably haven't planned where that's going to be, but if the weekend before I went to a estate sale, it's going to be a date that there is at an estate sale. If the week before I went to like apple picking, that's probably what it's going to be, just because I just did those things. And so I have such good sense memory of them that it's so easy to draw on, like, what did it look like, smell like, taste like, all those things. So yeah, it can really be almost anything. And I listened to this podcast once that I don't even remember what it was called, but they interviewed composers about their artistic process. And I don't know very much about classical music, but I do love it. And I grew up with it. And so I was like, maybe this will be interesting. And there was this person on there, don't remember, don't ask me, it'll never come back to me again. But what he said was that he would find ideas from everywhere and kind of magpie-like. But then once he had them, like once they were in his head or his heart or whatever, he knew that they just need to sit there and marinate in his brain glimmer until they had his brain all over them. Because once they had his brain and brain glimmer all over them, then they would be his, no matter where they came from. And that then by the time the composition came out, he couldn't have told you, like, where did I get this piece? Where did I get that other piece? But it all baked in this brain glimmer that is like uniquely fill in the name of person I don't remember here. And that's kind of that was like the best description I've ever heard of, like, kind of, I think, how I feel about ideas is like, they all kind of come in and they stick like pollen, and then like they either melt into the piece or they don't. And if they don't, then they just sort of live back there and either get discarded, forgotten, or put into the next thing.
That's gorgeous. I love that. Brain glimmer makes it sound very like 80s Don Bluth animation, you know, like I'm picturing I'm picturing the sparkle coming off of it.
No, I know. I want it. I want that to be a real thing.
Oh, I mean, I personally was going to say that I think I get fixations on things that come and go. I will become intensely interested in something like for a while, and like Roan kind of said, it simmers in the back of my mind for a while because it's something that I've spent adorable. It like simmers in the back of my mind. So like when I was writing Never Been Kissed, I was like, okay, so I'm writing this book. It's set at a drive-in movie theater. The reason it was set in a drive-in movie theater was because it was COVID time, and the only way we could safely gather to watch films was at drive-in movie theaters. And I was going to drive-in movie theaters and sitting there and being like, oh my gosh, there's something so romantic and nostalgic and summery about this, even though it's the fall or whatever. Which just kind of uncorked my like latent fascination with Danny Zuko and the Grease movies. Like, then it like spirals from there, right? Like even in this book, it has kind of a B plot about, you know, an aging film director who, you know, made this movie and they're going to revive it. Like during COVID, there weren't new movies coming out. So I was sitting at home watching all these movies from the 1970s directed by women. Like, and then I'm thinking like, oh, okay, you know, it'd be so interesting if like I took one of those, you know, like I made this character a female film director from the 1970s. What do I learn about this now? I did a similar thing with New Adult. I was really interested in like what they call them, like snake oil lawsuits against wellness companies, where they say like, this thing does this thing, and then people use it and they're like, okay, but I've rubbed this egg across my face like 17 times and it's doing nothing to my wrinkles, right? Like, so I knew this book was going to be about time traveling healing crystals, right? So I'm like, okay, so these healing crystals of time travel, why do they do that? Who told them, right? Then I get to this wellness company. Then I'm listening to wellness podcasts. Then I'm on mommy blogs. Like, it's just a whole wormhole that opens up. And of course, like that's barely a sliver of this book, right? Like that's not really what the book is about. But it is now deeply embedded in the DNA of the story. You can't read the story without engaging with that. And I always feel like I've hidden my fascinations in the story. So if you look hard enough, like, you know that I've spent 7 hours listening to podcasts on Gwyneth Paltrow, to be quite honest. So, you know, yeah.
But the Goop listeners, they know. They're like, I can tell that this is real.
I mean, it's called Dupe, the company of the book. So, you know, I mean, we're not going far. But the thing is that like, these little fascinations, like even with Matthew Prince, like I became obsessed with going on to like Saks Fifth Avenue and shopping for Matthew's wardrobe to the point that a whole scene would spring off of a jacket, like a $4,000 jacket that I could never afford. You know what I mean? So it's just like going down these fun little, that probably feel completely unproductive to the outside eye, but to a creative person, they're like, wow, that just opened a window and then a door and now I'm inside the house. Like, amazing.
Yes. Wait, can I ask a question, Timothy? I'm so curious if you do this at all, or if you have a version of this, is like you will go down that rabbit hole and kind of have in mind there's like something, and I don't know what it is that I need for this scene, but I will know it when I see it. And so I have to keep going down the rabbit hole until something sparks, and then I'll know that that's the thing. Do you have that?
I think so. Yeah. I think a lot of times, like if anyone looked at my Google search history, they'd be like, what is wrong with this guy? Oh my gosh. I think, yeah, I mean, I think like specifically with like Matthew Prince, when I actually, funny story, I saw the cover, right? Matthew has pink pants on the cover, and I could not justify that. I was like, no one wears pink pants. Then I Googled like designer pink pants and fell in love with these like crackle splatter. Like, I don't even remember what the designer was, but I was obsessed with them. I was like, I could never pull these off, but Matthew could. And then like the whole neat ugly that he has with Hector was completely structured around those pink pants. And so like I think sometimes I'm like hungry for,
Yes.
yeah, I'm hungry for, it's like when you're hungry and you're talking to your partner and you're like, where should we go to eat? Like, well, I'm not in the mood for this, but I don't know what I actually want to eat. I feel that. Yeah.
Yep. Love it.
So rad. I love that. It's all just part of the texture. And sometimes the texture that can just come in and drag you through the house that you've just broken into through hours of podcast listening.
Yes.
We have our first question from the Q&A. So guess that also if anybody has any other questions, anything that's part of, pop them in there. We'll get to it. This question is from Christian for Roan. That I've thoroughly enjoyed several of your books, including the double love story of The Holiday Trap. Find it interesting how successfully you manage to accurately represent both lesbian and gay male love. Do you find it difficult writing the love stories and the intimate or sex scenes for both genders, multiple genders?
I'm so glad you've enjoyed. Thank you for reading. No, I don't find it hard at all, actually. I think that like writing sex scenes for me it's about intimacy. And so it's really about like, how can I take this character that I've built, however far I've written, like however much I've written, this character that I have built, and figure out like what would sex mean to them? What would this sex act mean to them? How would it resonate with other lovers that they've had, other experiences that they've had? And then how can I tell you, the reader, something about that character through how they have sex, what their response to sex is, what they desire, how they like to be addressed, what words they like used for their body. Like it's really their character building things. And the thing about sex is that it's so subjective, right? So like, I may have a vagina that I used to have an orgasm, and it's not going to feel like another person who has a vagina who has an orgasm. Like there's not one way that they feel, right? There's not one way that any sex act feels across the board. And so for me, it's about like, what can I do to make sure that I am setting this scene so that the reader, whoever they may be, can sort of feel comfortable taking whatever role they want in the scene. One thing about sex scenes is like, depending on whose point of view they're written from, you get a different experience sometimes, it's a different character building exercise. So yeah, like whatever the gender of my characters, whatever the sexuality of my characters, yeah, it's all about intimacy, and it's all about how would that character experience pleasure, and then I want to give them what would make them experience pleasure.
Beautiful. That's super interesting. Timothy, do you have any thoughts from as far as writing intimacy from different characters' perspectives?
I mean, I would say just in general, like my first novel, Never Been Kissed, like the character learns over the course of the novel that he's on the asexual spectrum. And so like, whereas like in You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, we know off the bat that the two characters are allosexual people, but they have varying degrees of want and desire for sex. And I think like, that's always one of the things, like Roan said, it's intimacy, right? How do these characters relate to their own bodies? How do their bodies respond to other people's bodies? Do they want the response from other bodies? Like, what I really like is that, like, I always call it gifting my characters. I'm gifting my characters this moment of intimacy because of X, Y, Z, and yada, yada, yada. So, like, when I was writing You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, it was, like, natural, like, after writing a book that, like, some readers would refer to as no heat, like it was natural to have these two characters who are in this forced proximity situation, spending 24 hours a day together, are completely attracted to each other, but like in a nasty way from the moment they meet each other, that they're gonna find a sexual outlet for those feelings because they have been brewing over the course of the novel. And I gift them that moment. I don't just write the moment because the story calls for it, if that makes any sense. But I just loved what Roan said about no two people experience pleasure in the same way. Therefore, writing a character that is outside of your gender or sexuality or whatever, we as creators and authors are constantly thinking about our characters and their expressions with the world, right? Like their experiences with the world. So like anything you read in one of my novels, and I don't know if Rowan feels this way, it's like, that's not me, right? Like I'm not endorsing something as me. This is me thinking about the varying ways that the world can contain connection.
Totally agree with that. Yeah.
It's on my mind because of the triumph at the Oscars last night, but how Everything Everywhere All at Once tells such a specific story on a lot of levels, where it's specifically about this particular family, this immigrant experience, this woman's queer experience, relationship with her mother, but through like hyper specific character driven storytelling, it can reach so many people who may or may not, find pieces of themselves in it or find nothing in themselves in it. But I think that's the power of storytelling, especially in relationship to this conversation, where in previous times where it's like what was marketable and what was publishable was probably like heterosexual romance featuring two cisgendered white people because that was what sold and that spoke to the most people. But I think the way the industry is booming right now is proof positive that like the more specific you get with storytelling, the truer the emotion hits for a broad range of people that most like executives would be very surprised by. As they should be.
I think that's so well said. I thought that movie was fucking brilliant for exactly that reason and many, many others. But yeah, that is this kind of story that I care most about consuming as a reader or watcher and care most about writing. Like I have said this a million times and I don't even feel bad saying it anymore, although I used to. Like, I don't care about plot when I'm writing romance. I care about scene, I care about character, I care about dialogue, I care about psychology, I care about aesthetics, I care about literally everything else. But like plot's pretty interchangeable for me. It's not my métier. But when a story can do that, can be so specific, I feel like it actually needs the space sometimes of having either less plot or the most wackadoodle plot, because the more space there is for a person to be having a singular experience, the more the audience is able to identify. So like, I think that movie is so brilliant in part because and I'm no expert, like I saw this once, I'm just talking because this is me as a viewer. To me, it was like, okay, like viewership has a problem if the lead is not a cis straight white person. Like viewership writ large has a problem because they feel that it's a barrier to identification. Not everyone, not all the time, but all at once and everywhere. Anyway, so yeah, so like what they had then was a barrier to viewership for a portion of an audience. And it was so smart to say, I am going to give this character a totally singular experience that no one could think that they identify with. No one's going to be like, oh, totally. Yeah. The multiverse popping back and forth. Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's not my experience of popping back and forth between the multiverse while I have a laundromat and I'm managing a dying father. But like, I guess it's probably pretty accurate. Like no one can do that. Instead, what they can say is, this is a family in crisis. This is a mother pushed beyond the limits of what she is capable of dealing with. This is about intergenerational care and love. This is about storytelling. This is about imagination. This is about dreaming. And like, that to me is where the magic happens, is in showing people that they do relate. Like, you do relate with that character because you also have experiences that are hard, and seeing that it's not a realistic, like a, capital R realistic thing, it gives you permission to identify even with someone who you might not immediately think you share something for some audience members. And I think that is like the most brilliant move. And it's why we need queer stories and non-white people stories and non-ableist stories in every genre. right? So it's not just about romance, it's not just about sci-fi, it's not just about fantasy. It's about how there are far more perspectives in the world than most people grow up thinking there are, and that art is a universal way that we can talk about those things. And I just, oh my God, anyway, I just got really excited about that movie because I loved it so much.
It's such a good movie.
So
It's
good.
such a good movie. And it's I liked what you said, Hannah, too, because I'm thinking now with what Roan said, it's like, and this is not derogatory towards any other films, but like there are some films, and one in particular that I'm thinking about that was a queer film that came out last year or the year before or whatever, where it's like sometimes the story is so generic that it becomes solely about identity, right? Like when the story becomes solely about identity, then that barrier that Roan was talking about becomes an isolating factor to an audience member who says, well, like, that's not me. So what is even the point in engaging with this thing? And when your movie's marketing says like, this is what it's about, when your movie set, when your movie's Twitter account says, this is what the movie's about. The thing with Everything Everywhere All at Once is like, even if you went into that movie prepared, you did not know what was going to happen, right? Like, that's something that like I think horror movies do really well. I think that's something that like even some romances can do really well, right? Where they surprise you and they circumvent your expectations in a way that make you think like, oh my gosh, wait, the veil has just been lifted on my worldview, and now I can access things. And I actually really love that wackadoodle thing that you said, Rowan. Like, I think wackadoodle stories, when you come out the gate really strong with something that's just going to like knock your audience off kilter or your reader off kilter, they're going to go along for the ride in a way that you might not have expected. Like I was, not to bring this back to me, but like I was thinking about Matthew Prince when there were some straight readers that had sent me a couple messages being like, I've never read a queer romance, but I decided to give this one a shot because I watched Schitt's Creek with my family. And I was like, great, I hope you enjoy it, like whatever. And a lot of them like, or, one of them that I'm thinking about in particular came back to me and was like, as soon as you told me that he bought an island from that first sentence, like it didn't matter. I wasn't going to identify with him, right? He comes from a world of wealth and privilege and whatever. She was like, I identified with him on a human level as I read the story. And that is what like got me. And she's like, now I'm going to go pick up all these other ones. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, that is amazing that you were able to like, and I didn't do it consciously. I wasn't like I'm going to hit you over the head with this ridiculous thing, but it worked in a way that she was like, oh, I was able to see a worldview I might not have otherwise. So yeah, that just makes me want to write the most bonkers thing I can think of.
Me too. And the book that I'm currently plotting, I actually am like, is this too bonkers? I don't know. But I'm inspired by this conversation, and I'm going to make it even more bonkers
I was
tomorrow.
about to say, you've answered your own question, Rowan. Is a book
Yeah, I did.
not bonkers enough?
More bonkers.
Oh yeah,
More
the
bonkers.
book that I'm working on too is also really just completely out.
I love that. More oddball storytelling. It's just what we want. We're starting a movement right here in this Zoom room, and I'm very excited to be a part of it. Thank you. I have another question from the chat from Caitlin. Have you ever had to cut a scene, character, or plot point that you really loved from one of your books during editing?
Definitely.
How is the
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off.
No, please just share the memory. Let's have this beautiful idea. Let it have its moment in the sun.
Well, I don't even have like I think that one of the best thing about editors is that they are not sentimentally or personally attached to any of your ideas. And so they're often able to say, hey, I know you really like this scene. I like this scene too. I think we can just like it together, and no one else needs the scene in the book because you kind of do the work elsewhere. And it's like, but my time, but it's like, but they're always right. I've never had someone tell me that I could cut something or I could lose something and done it and been like, no, they were wrong. I definitely needed that scene of baking cookies together, just like the other scene of baking cookies together. So yeah, I've cut many scenes, and I wrote a book that I like completely ripped apart 4 different times before I got it anywhere close to right, which was Small Change. And I deleted the whole book. Like I literally select all deleted the book. and start it over because it was not working. So yeah, I'm actually a huge fan of getting rid of things, not in a cruel way, but I overwrite, so it's never bad to cut things.
Do you ever like save it for later, like, cut stuff and then put it somewhere else and then it finds its way into another thing?
Yeah, I have done that. I would like to say that what happens is it all gets used and I'm just like brilliant, but what happens is 90% of it I never look at again. I don't remember what it was and it never makes it into anything else. But I have had little things like I pulled a subplot out of one book because it was too long. The book was too long, and I ended up actually using it for another project, which was like a short story that I did on the Hallmark website. And so I think that sometimes those ideas, they have like a sparkle that's just a different color sparkle than the manuscript, so it doesn't fit even though it is good or useful. And I think like having people to tell you like this is an orange sparkle book and these are green sparkles, so put it in a green sparkle book is like a always useful tool.
This is related to the brain glimmer. It all comes back to the
Yes.
brain glimmer.
It's all very glittery.
It's all glittery.
It's
Right,
like
Timothy,
decluttering, when you move, like I've moved 8,000 times and like you get rid of stuff. In all of that decluttering and getting rid of over 8 moves, including all my books, I donated them all to the library in New Orleans because I literally could not physically move them one more time. And I was like, well, bye. I've never regretted a single object that I've gotten rid of ever. Because like once it's not there and you aren't seeing it all the time, this brain, no, it's gone forever.
that's it. That's beautiful. Very freeing. Timothy, what's your ritual? How do you cut things out? What sage are you lighting over the document?
Well, Roan and I have shared one editor, and I also agree that like an editor comes in without the sentimental eye, and so when they say like something's not needed here, like they're telling the truth, right? Like they're reaching the story from an objective lens and saying like a reader doesn't need this. And I think the book that got the most of that was Matthew Prince, which was overly long when I turned it in, and I knew that. And there was an ice skating scene. It was really sweet and lovely, and I enjoyed it. But she was like, "This is just slowing down the pace of the story now. Like they're rehashing things that they've already talked about. Like we don't really need this scene. Okay, we're gonna cut it." Like there was a version. I loved your sparkle thing, Roan, where like there was a version of this book where like there was a big scene that happened like at the ball drop in Times Square. And my editor was like, nothing about this book is a Times Square ball drop book. Like, did you think about that? And I was like, no. She was like, maybe you want to think about that. And then I like rewrote that whole part. And it just, I'm saying it's infinitely better, but I felt so much better about it. It actually catered to the characters that I had created over the last 90,000 words, instead of being like, oh, I made this beautiful set piece of Times Square, which would be super great if this was a movie and we needed a trailer and whatever, but we don't. And so I got to write a different scene in place of it that really made me feel like, oh, I did the work to put it together. So I guess like begrudgingly, I'll cut things because I know I'll have to probably replace them or fix things in other parts of the book. So that sucks. But at the same time, I do always save them in a file. I do always put them somewhere, but I can't find anything on my computer. Like I have so many tabs open. I have so many file folders. I would not be able to find them even if I wanted them. So they probably won't make it into another project, but maybe one day.
One day you'll die and your juvenilia and marginalia will live forever in some library somewhere.
Yeah, hopefully.
They'll make like half-baked adaptations like Sanditon. Well, they'll be like, we think this is where he was going with it. Come on, PBS. Well, I think this is just about where we are at for our time. Thank you both so much. Thank you for these excellent questions in the chat. Roan and Timothy, can you tell us about any upcoming releases? Where can people find you? Where's the best place to, continue this beautiful relationship with your work?
Oh my gosh. Well, I actually don't have a date for my next release yet, so I can't tell you the date, but it is a rom dram, related to but not serial with The Holiday Trap. So it has some crossover characters. It's set in New Orleans in the same neighborhoods, and it has some things, but it will be able to be read as a standalone. And it is about a haunter, which is someone who creates haunted houses, who loves everything horror and terrifying and ghostly and scary, and someone who is very much averse to anything scary because he actually sees ghosts for real.
That sounds amazing.
I don't have a title, don't have a release date, but that's what it is, and it should be here sometime next year, I think.
So exciting.
Oh, and find me.
Oh, yeah.
Find me. Come, like, people, I need your help. Come find me on TikTok and tell me what the hell you want to see videos about, because I am lazy and also doubt that my ideas are good. So you should come tell me what you want to hear. And I'm Roan Parrish on all the things, all the platforms. So come hang out with me.
This whole thing could have ended up being about TikTok and how to make it. So I'll have to have a part 2 that's just explain to, at least for myself, explain these millennials how TikTok is working.
Oh, I love it. I love it as a consumer. And then I go to make a video and I'm like, nobody cares what I have to say. I should watch more videos. And then I do.
Let me scroll for another 5 hours for inspiration. All right, Timothy, we know New Adult is coming out this summer. There anything else you want to say about that? Other projects? Where the people can find you? Your TikTok ideas? Go for it.
Yeah, don't have those. I do have a book, New Adult, comes out August 15th. It tells the story of Nolan Baker, who is a struggling stand-up comedian who thinks his career is stalled out, gets this amazing chance to open for a famous comedian, but it happens to be on the night of his sister's wedding. He thinks he can do double duty. Some mishaps ensue. He gets these healing crystals from a dubious wellness company, and he wakes up 30. 7 years have passed. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know the man he's in bed next to, but he thinks if he goes to find his best friend, Drew, he'll have the answer. But Drew hates his guts and he doesn't know why. So now he has to gain his trust and his heart and also get back to being 23. There's a lot going on. There's a corgi named Milkshake. It's a very, very, it's a book that I dearly love a lot. So I hope you will enjoy it. And then teaser for something I hope will be announced very shortly is that I have a book coming out in January, which is called The Fake Dating Game, which is a fake dating romance that takes place on the set of a supermarket sweep style competition show. High heat, it's fun. I hope you will enjoy it. Yeah, and then you can find me at Timothy Janovsky on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, where I also don't have any ideas. And you can also find me on my website, where I do have a newsletter that I never send, but if you subscribe, I'll get a notification and it'll remind me that I have one, and we all send one.
Beautiful.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. I love picking your brains about all these good things, and I will kick it over to Kristen to wrap us all up with this wonderful time. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I just want to thank everybody for coming, everybody for participating. It was an amazing conversation. I was so happy to be able to listen to it. And I just want to thank our partners out Montclair and Watchung Booksellers. And again, I'm going to stick it in the chat. Please check out Watchung Booksellers for all your books, all your book needs, but definitely for these books that were talked about here. And this is the Montclair Public Library, thanking everybody, and have a wonderful night.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Good night.